Welcome to episode number 253, where I'm speaking with Jen Rand of Mount Madonna Institute about Ritucharya, which are the Ayurvedic guidelines to help keep us pacified in the coming season. We'll cover, of course, autumn for the Northern Hemisphere and spring for the Southern Hemisphere. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening. And now here's a new episode. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Jen Rand, who is a certified Ayurvedic practitioner who holds an MA in Ayurveda from Mount Madonna Institute. She also works at Mount Madonna Institute as an Ayurvedic practitioner, yoga teacher, and administrator. Jen enjoys spending time experiencing the 5 elements in nature through hiking and backpacking. And that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about the elements and in particular how they affect us during seasonal change, which is what we're all experiencing right now, Jen, right? Welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. We've talked about seasonal change, and I have a group going through the seasonal cleanse at the moment, but it's really good just to remind ourselves of this importance of paying attention, having awareness to the seasonal change. So we understand in Ayurveda, Jen, that of course we're a part of nature. We're made up of the 5 elements of nature. But I'd like to start with a brief explanation of the 5 elements for people, maybe some new listeners, and why it's important for us to recognize that we are a part of nature.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. Well, in Ayurveda and in yoga, we look at our 5 elements, beginning with the subtlest, ether, or sometimes we call that the space element. And then we also have the air element, the water element, the fire element, and the earth element. And I went a little out of order there. We started at the subtlest, but those are the 5. Mm-hmm. And yeah, when we're looking at why is it important for us to recognize that we're a part of nature? I'm thinking something as simple as the air element, right? We need air. We can't live very long without that air, right? Breathing is such an important function for us. And so just connecting back to those really basic elemental, in a different sense of using the word, pieces and processes that keep us alive on a regular basis and also help us feel vibrant, right? So if we don't have enough air, things are stagnant, we're not going to feel as healthy and as nourished. And of course, water, we're constantly in need of that. That's something, all throughout the day. And of course, we couldn't live very long without. Mm-hmm. And, we may think that water just comes from the tap or from the bottle, but where did it come from before it got there? And really understanding that, having access to those precious resources is really important. And of course, our food, something else that we, need access to on a very regular basis. And it's that soil, the earth, the sunlight, which comes from the fire, the water, that all wouldn't if we didn't have those, we wouldn't have the food that nourishes us and gives us energy. And again, helps us feel good on a regular basis. And, we can get those things even living in a very urban environment. But I think most people can relate to what it feels like to spend a day in the park, go to the beach, do something in nature, go on a hike. And, unless you're like tiring yourself out with some strenuous activity, going out into nature is very rejuvenating. We get to interact with our senses. And, when I come back, I just feel like I've been replenished after I spend time out in nature. And I also feel like when I'm out there, I feel like I'm part of something bigger than my day-to-day troubles. And so that understanding of like, we're part of an ecosystem where we have a sense of belonging. And, I know we're coming out of COVID, but there was a long time when people didn't have something necessarily to connect to. And so, finding that sense of nature, something to connect back to. And, that's just the how you feel part. But I mean, scientifically, there are studies coming out now that show that there are a lot of benefits to being out in nature, cognitive benefits, psychological well-being. People feel happier. They have better social interactions when they're out in nature. And so I think it's one of those things that we can accept it or not, but there is a connection with nature. And when you do come to accept it, I think that leads to more of a sense of grounding within a person, because if you're not really aware and understanding that nature can affect you on a daily basis, you're caught off guard. You walk outside and it's cloudy and you're like caught in a kind of foggy, kind of heavy nature all day long. But if you understand that that's because of the weather and that there's something you can do to balance it out, I just feel like that's really empowering.
Yes, absolutely. And the more, like you said, we can have this awareness and understanding that, as is the macrocosm, so is the microcosm, because we're made up of the same elements. When these shifts occur in nature, they also have such an influence on our body. And therefore, we need to understand what the influence of these elements different elements that occur in the season are, and how they affect our body, the qualities and the doshas. So what I'd love to discuss now, Jen, is now that, in the Northern Hemisphere, and we're going to cover the Southern Hemisphere as well. We want to make sure we include everybody, but in the Northern Hemisphere, now we're entering into autumn. And obviously in the Southern Hemisphere, they're entering into spring. And Ayurveda talks about the importance of the shift in the seasons and particularly changing our routines in the season. So let's talk about the influence of this shift, this change between the seasons, this transition time. And then we can move into explaining Ritucharya, which is the guidelines for the season. So let's start with the Northern Hemisphere and moving into autumn, the end of summer, moving into autumn, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So that change in the seasons is the Ritusandhi, the Ritu meaning season, and then Sandhi is like a joint or a juncture when two different things come together. And really that is important to recognize that there is a shift happening. I kind of think of it as like if you're on a road trip and you've been driving for a long time, and then that there's a turn coming up, and after, you've been kind of just going along on autopilot for a while, you're like, oh, I need to pay attention. Something different is going to happen here. And so there's that key, kind of a lot of what we teach in Ayurveda is just awareness. And so just being aware that things are changing. And when they do change, our behavior needs to change. And so, we have these Ritucharya, again, that word Ritu from season, and then Charya meaning behavior or activity or conduct. And so the way that we behave, the way we act, conduct ourselves changes based on the season. And so we're gearing up for that shift, that seasonal change. And so some of these things are very obvious, right? We learn these things. It's starting to cool off here in the Northern Hemisphere. So we're going to pull out the warmer clothes from the closet that have been, stored away for a while and put those summer clothes away. But there are other things. So that was just two of the gunas that we look at that are associated with the season. We move from hot to cold. But what do we do to transition from more of a wet season to a dry season? Is there something internally that we need to do? Or when the elements and the gunas change and we're looking at rough versus smooth? And so that might not be as obvious, but there are very specific guiding principles and practices that allow us to change our behavior and affect these gunas, these qualities that exist within us.
Okay, yes, great. So that's what we want to get into. So let's talk about the gunas that we're experiencing as we move into autumn. Now, obviously, autumn can be different depending on where you are on the planet, but let's talk about, the cooler, drier season of autumn.
Yeah. So autumn is our vata season. So when we think about the doshas, the dosha that most matches up with autumn is vata. And so the ether and the air elements, those are the two elements that we're looking at. And then the qualities that come in related to those elements are that cold, light, rough, subtle, and mobile qualities. And so we see this in cold, like the temperature getting colder. We see the dry when we look at things like the leaves drying up on the trees, there's less moisture. Obviously, when there's less moisture, things get lighter. That's why those leaves are light and blowing around. We think of those like classic images of, right, the brown leaves blowing around.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that leads more into these other gunas, the rough, because we think about, without that moisture, things become rough. They become subtle and lighter, so there's less of a density to them, and mobile, because when they're light, things are easy to move around. And so, we can see this even in things like it's more common for people to get sick because there's a dryness and that movement of viruses and things moving around. I mean, some of it also has to do with us coming indoors in the winter, in the fall, being closer together. And so we'll see all of these qualities, the cold, light, dry, rough, subtle, and mobile, increase out in nature, which means they're going to increase within us. And so for a lot of us, we're going to feel this within our bodies. Things will cool down, we'll get a little drier, we'll feel lighter. And so depending on a person's unique constitution, they're going to react to this in different ways. So someone who manages a lot of moisture in their body, a kapha type person, they may actually feel really balanced when these drier elements come in nature. But for people like me, and there's probably a lot of us out there who already have a lot of vata running in our systems, we're going to start to notice that we run cold. We feel that kind of tenseness and tightness that we do to kind of curl up and take care of our inner core when we start to cool down. We'll notice dryness, like maybe a dry cough or you get dry skin. You might feel some of that mobility, those more scattered thoughts. So if those are things are happening to you, again, we're starting to understand, well, why now? And why didn't I feel this before? It's because of the changes in the season.
Right. And so it's because nature is influencing the gunas, the qualities of the season are influencing the qualities within our constitution.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. So as you said, a person who has a high vata constitution will be sensitive to these shifts in autumn, these vata-like qualities. And so let's talk about, well, how do we manage that? If we're noticing an increase in these vata qualities, as you mentioned, how would we go about balancing that?
Yeah, great question. So in Ayurveda, one of the principles we look at is bringing in opposite qualities. So to balance the cold, we bring in warm. To balance the dryness, we bring in wet. To balance the roughness, we bring in things that are smoother. We want something more calm and stable to balance out that mobility. So any activities that we do in our daily life, any of our foods, anything that we're going to cultivate in our environment will have that effect. So when we think about food, we want to bring more moisture into our meals and in our drinks. So staying away from like dry, rough, raw foods and moving more toward things that are soupy and warm and moist. Staying away from like cold iced drinks and favoring more room temperature or warm like teas and warm drinks. And then balancing out that dry and rough quality, we want to bring in some good fats. So having some nice oleation and think about things that are going to be a little more dense and grounding. So richer foods, having plenty of protein in the diet, things like nuts and dairy, if those are digestible. And then we mentioned staying hydrated with nice warm drinks and liquids, but it's not just water. So it's that combination of water with some healthy fats. And so we can add that to our diet, but we can also add oleation to our skin. And so like a daily habit or routine would be to add in abhyanga. And if you're not already doing it, maybe doing it more often. You might notice that having that oil on the skin on a much more regular basis. And so I don't know if everyone knows what abhyanga is, but it's this beautiful practice of applying warm oil to the skin in a self massage. And the most grounding and balancing for Vata at this time of the season would be the sesame oil. And so you get it a little bit warmed up, you put it all over the skin, you let it sink all the way in so that it's nourishing and going all the way through all the levels of the tissues. So that's a very beautiful practice. And we talk about the tastes to emphasize. And so sweet, sour, and salty tasting foods are going to be more balancing and reducing the bitter, pungent, and astringent taste at this time of the year. And so you can use herbs to do things like that. Ginger, cinnamon, cumin, garlic, fennel are all really great ones. And the last thing is part of our daily routine is really just keeping a routine so that things are consistent. And so that could be any kind of daily ritual that you want to bring in. It could be just sitting and drinking warm water and having some quiet time to yourself in the morning, engaging in some kind of a meditation, or if there's another thing like a walk or some kind of regular activity, but having a consistent practice that you do at this time of the year, especially, will just give you that routine sense of something being consistent and grounding in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we know, routine is very pacifying for Vata, which is a tendency towards irregularity in the body. So the more that we can keep our eating, waking, sleeping, like self-care practices, mindfulness practices, as you were saying, Jen, in a routine and all these daily Dinercharya, that just helps keep Vata pacified and keeping the nervous system calm and, nourishing Vata, which is really needed at this time of year. And like you said as well, our digestive system is going to be stronger. Hopefully, our Agni is stronger in the cooler weather than it was during the summertime when the Agni can be a little lower. So now we can bring in more of those harder to digest foods. And of course, it's person dependent. It depends on your digestive fire. But for the most part, our digestive system is stronger in the cooler weather, so we can bring in those harder to digest items, and ideally eating them in the middle of the day when our digestive fire is strongest. So great points there. And again, I think, yes, remembering the routine for Vata so that we can make sure all the systems of the body are in a routine, and that will just keep, especially the Vata dosha, in balance. I'm going to jump in here for a moment because if you're listening to this information and it's getting a little overwhelming about how to change your behaviors with the seasons and you want more information around this, well, I have something that could support you, and that is my 28-day online self-paced daily habits for holistic health program. The objective of this 28-day program is to educate and support you through the process of implementing daily routines and habits to help you achieve holistic health by balancing the doshas, preventing illness, and supporting all the systems of your body so that you can thrive. In this program, I cover how to structure your day to flow with the daily energy cycles, the circadian rhythms, rather than going against them and suffering. I cover the mental gunas or qualities and how to maintain positive mental health. I talk about the foundations of Ayurvedic healing, and this is the principle of healing in Ayurveda. Like increases like, opposites pacify, exactly what we're talking about here in this podcast episode. I'll help you to understand this principle of healing so that you can go forward and be your own healer and understand how to navigate the seasons to maintain balance, to prevent illness, and feel empowered to manage your own health. I'll also talk about connecting to your true nature and to your intuition to help guide you in living a positive and fulfilling life. If you'd like more details on this, check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and click on the programs tab and you'll find all the information there. Again, this program is self-paced. You can start at any time and you can take your time going through it also. Okay, let's get back to my conversation with Jen. Is there anything else that you wanted to add there, Jen?
One more thing to think about, so many people who practice Ayurveda are also very into yoga. And when we think about our active postures within yoga, slowing them down a little bit at this time of the season when we're moving into fall this time of year. So if you do a very active class that has lots of movement, maybe more quick movements, thinking about bringing in more restorative practices, things that are just a little bit slower, especially one of the side effects, one of the symptoms, something that often people who have vata imbalance experience is trouble sleeping. And so doing some of those cooler, calmer, restorative type poses in the evening, maybe engaging in something like legs up the wall before bed, can really help encourage more restful sleep in the evening.
Great. Okay, Jen. So let's move now towards the southern hemisphere where they're coming out of winter and going to spring. And I've been talking to a lot of clients there recently who said they've had a really cold winter and looking forward to spring. So I'd love to talk about what are the gunas, the qualities that we see in springtime, and how do they affect our body and how do they affect the doshas?
Yeah. So in spring, we're transitioning from the cooler time. And yes, many folks are excited to know that it gets a little bit warmer. Our days get a little bit longer. And the elements that are predominant in the spring season, which is related to the kapha dosha, are water and earth. And so that shift from the dryness that happens over the fall and the winter changes, and we get a little more rain oftentimes, or maybe it's melting snow. Again, this is very climate dependent based on your geography. But you get a little more of that dampness that comes in the springtime. And of course, daylight is another factor. In spring, it's very nice to know that the days are getting a little bit longer. So if you've experienced some darkness, that's always something to look forward to, those longer days. And so when we think about those elements of water and earth in the springtime, the gunas, the qualities that we associate with those are wet, cloudy, cool, heavy, dull, and dense. And so you could really think about like a really thick, heavy, cloudy day when the fog just kind of hangs low and there's heaviness that you can kind of almost feel in the air, but then you feel it within your body. You feel it maybe in the head or in the sinuses. You might go throughout the day with a little bit of sluggishness. You're not really sure why you feel tired, even if you think you slept well. And so, of course, these are tendencies. Weather can change. You can get really nice sunny days in the spring too. But that's what we often experience in the springtime, a little bit more of that dampness.
Right. Yes. And as you said, then increasing kapha dosha will be very sensitive in this time of year and feeling maybe some of that heaviness or the lethargy or maybe congestion in the body. So let's talk about how we pacify these aggravations in the body if we are feeling that increase of kapha, and what are the Ritucharya that we should bring in for spring in order to maintain balance so people can be prepared now as they're going into the new season in the southern hemisphere.
Yes, of course. So yes, like you said, like increases like, and so we'll bring in those opposite qualities to balance again. And so balancing that cold with warm, balancing the wet with dry, almost the opposites of what we were doing in Vata season, right? Balancing the heaviness with light. So our foods, our activities, all of that is going to follow that trend. And so when we think about warmer, lighter meals, we might think about fresh steamed vegetables, having plenty of warm food, drinking things that are warm. The tastes that we would bring in are pungent, bitter, and astringent. Those are the ones we want to focus on and have a little bit less of the sweet, sour, and salty. And so things like leafy greens are going to have that astringent quality. Those are going to be really great. Any kind of like chilies or things that have a little bit of pungentness. Reducing the things that have that cloudy, heavy quality, things like dairy, because those often we have cold. And also, we just think of that kind of thick heaviness of dairy. A lot of great culinary spices to bring in to enliven the food and make it a little bit more energetic and light. We can bring in things like ginger, nutmeg, black pepper, mustard. I mentioned chili before. And again, you were talking about the timing of our meals, making sure that we're not having really heavy, dense meals at the end of the day. So if you're going to eat a bigger meal, eat it in the middle of the day and try to keep those meals on the opposite ends of the breakfast and the dinner, a little bit lighter, both in terms of the quality and the quantity. And some activities we can bring in our daily activity, our dinacharya, our routines that we do for ourselves. Dry brushing is a great one to bring in at this point. You can still do some of the abhyanga if you're experiencing any dryness in the skin, but really thinking about stimulating the lymphatic movement, because again, we're thinking about that heaviness and the sluggishness that tends to accumulate in the body. And so if you haven't done dry brushing, you can do it with a more kind of a gross sort of kind of sturdy, dry brush, or you can do a little bit softer, milder version with silk gloves, and you're moving the lymph. Everything is moving toward the heart. Similar activity that what you would do in an abhyanga, but just not adding more oil to the body and encouraging more of that lightness, and being more active in general. So increasing activity levels. We had talked before about taking the yoga practice a little bit down in terms of activity, and now we want to bring it back up. So adding in new things would also be great, varying the routine just a little bit. We talked before about it being so established, and now it's like changing it up a little bit, adds a little bit of more of that energy and enlivenness. So a new sport, a new pastime, anything that you can do to make things kind of fun and invigorating.
Great advice there. And I think as well, particularly in the kapha time of day, right? Especially in the morning time between 6 and 10 a.m. when kapha is high in the environment, that's a time to be really up and energized. You can have kapha, that grounding energy of kapha supporting you at that time. And it's a great time to do those new activities, right, Jen?
Yes, I love that you brought in the time of the day too. There's so many layers, right? And yes, that kapha time of the day, the morning is the best time to really get out and engage in that physical activity.
Taking a moment out here to bring you a word from our sponsor, Mount Madonna Institute, who has wonderful mini course offerings which begin from September 2022, including allopathy, functional medicine and collaboration, diagnostic methods, Ayurvedic psychology, and classical texts, history, and philosophy. Their Ayurvedic health counselor program starts January 2023, and you can receive $100 off this program if you register before December 31st using the discount code ELEMENTS22. See the show notes or visit mountmadonnainstitute.org for further details. There are many layers, and it's a journey. And we're always learning on this path. But I think as well, just to simplify things is in regards to your food, that Ayurveda says eat seasonally, ideally locally as well. So checking out what's in your local farmer's market, and nature is amazing because nature gives us this seasonal fruit and veg to help keep us in balance. So these seasonal fruits and veg in general help to pacify those doshas that can be sensitive with the qualities of the season.
Yes, I think that's such a beautiful reminder, and something that I've really come to appreciate and embody as I've studied Ayurveda is not only visiting the farmers markets, because you really do get what's in season, as opposed to at the grocery store. There's things like tomatoes and berries and things that can be there all year round when really that's not their season. They've been imported from somewhere else where that's their season to have it. And so, yes, the farmers market really helps us tune into what is being produced locally in the environment at that time. And it's always exactly what we need. And also, if you have the opportunity to do some gardening, I mean, that's a really great way also to just kind of start to learn what's going to grow. Because if you try to grow things out of their season, they just don't do well. And you start to understand why things follow the rhythm. And a lot of it so much has to do with sunlight, following our daily patterns of sunlight that we get at different times of the year. So yeah, Love the farmers markets.
Yeah, and that's it. It really is, as we said earlier, it's all about just awareness. And Ayurveda is a journey of awareness and being very conscious of your actions and how you spend your time, your money, and what you're consuming physically and also with your senses. So it's about having that awareness. And the advice here today is obviously general. So having awareness as well about your unique constitution. We know we each have a unique blueprint. And so it's really being aware of these qualities in your body. Not everyone's going to react the same way to each seasonal shift. So tuning in and getting to know these gunas, understanding the gunas and the qualities you're feeling. And when you're having that maybe quiet time in the morning, that you're checking in with how you feel. And as we say in Ayurveda, that simple healing principle of like increases like and opposites pacify. It's like, okay, how am I feeling today? And as Jen was listing off these qualities, okay, if you're feeling heavy, let me bring in some lightness to my practices today, to my food, and so on. So again, really bring it back to your body, how you're feeling, and getting in tune with your unique constitution. And again, it's a journey, it's a self-study, but a fascinating one, right, Jen?
Yes, definitely. And I really appreciate what you said. Bring it back to yourself and how you're feeling. And one of the things that was really kind of reinforced a lot and really kind of driven home for me when I was studying and learning Ayurveda in the very beginning was bring it back to the gunas. And so for those who are new, gunas are those qualities that we were just listing. And so sometimes in the beginning, people do get confused. Well, if vata is this, do I need more of that or less of it? And it can get a little confusing when we think about the doshas, but when you get to the qualities, they're just the opposites that we all learned back in kindergarten, right? Hot, cold, wet, dry, heavy, light. And so sitting with that awareness, how do I feel, really is the easiest and most accessible way to start to learn Ayurveda, and just asking yourself what you need.
Yeah. And that tuning in every morning, taking some quiet time during your Dinercharya in the morning to tune in and see how you're feeling. And rather than checking off a list, like, oh, I'm going to do this, this, and this in regards my yoga and my Dinercharya, say, just tune in first and say, okay, what's going to serve me today? And what am I feeling? And what's the opposite qualities I can bring in to make sure that I'm feeling pacified and that's going to support me throughout my day?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Jen, so you like to spend a lot of time in nature, and also you're up in that beautiful part of the world, and you're working on the Mount Madonna campus. So tell me a little bit about it. Sounds gorgeous, overlooking Monterey Bay.
Yes, it is. It's absolutely wonderful. Yeah, very, very privileged and very blessed to be able to spend time on that land. It's wonderful. Um, yeah, interestingly, we have this pattern in the Bay Area where right before we get into fall, we get this really strong blast of summer. And so right now we've been experiencing some pretty warm weather. September is often the warmest weather that we get in the Bay Area, the kind of the greater Bay Area. We're south of San Francisco, but we get a lot of that similar Bay Area weather. And of course, we have our own bay. We get the Monterey Bay down here, which is just beautiful. And yeah, when you're out, you're saying, spending time out in nature, getting to really tune in, for me, tuning into the senses. And so this time of year, as we're moving into fall, there's a different smell in the air. We have a lot of redwood trees on our campus.
Oh, beautiful.
And the redwood trees take on a different smell. And I think a lot of it has to do with they're getting towards that driest part of the season, right before we get ready for our fall, hopefully lots of good fall rain this year. And so the smell is different. You walk through the forest and there's a little bit different sound because a lot of the leaves are starting to fall off of the redwoods and they're kind of brown and crunchy. We do think of redwoods as evergreens, but they eventually, the little pieces of the evergreen leaf grows off enough that some of them do shed off. And so if you're thinking, wait, what? I thought redwood trees were always green. They do lose some of their leaves. And so, yeah, all of the things that you experience, you do, if you're aware, there is a subtle shift in the fall. And we get some of those really clear days where you can just see all the way down to the coast. And then the really fun thing, one of my favorites, is that when there's fog at the coast, you just see this pillowy blanket. It looks like there's just cotton covering everything because you're way up above it.
Gorgeous. Uh-huh.
And so you get that real light clarity because you're up above all of it. And you just see that really beautiful clear sky. So yeah, I mean, I could go on and gush forever about how beautiful it is up there, but you're getting the idea, hopefully.
Well, it just sounds wonderful. And when people are doing courses with the Mount Madonna Institute, that there's in-person requirements. So you're getting to study in this beautiful environment, which I think is amazing.
Yes. We're so excited to be hosting people back on land again. And so because Ayurveda is so experiential and we're talking about these qualities, you do have to feel them. And when you're assessing another person, you want to be able to feel these things in their pulse and see them in their physical presentation. And so part of our program is we do have some in-person requirements. So you get to come up, be on the land, you get to stay there. We have different options for people who like to camp versus if you want a cabin, if you want a nice room. So you can come, and it's really, we talk about the basics, right? We look back to Samkhya philosophy and we look at that chart, and down at the bottom are those 5 elements, right? And what better way to be embodied in yoga and in Ayurveda than to be in the elements and get to experience them. So, we love it. Yeah, we love it. We love inviting folks to come join us and be on campus and study with us.
Yeah, I think the environment in which you learn is so important. And especially I love that with the redwoods, some of us in other parts of the world aren't familiar with the redwoods, and they are such a symbolic tree as well, besides from the fact that they are just gorgeous and they grow several hundred feet, right, Jen?
Yeah, really tall ones are like 300 feet or more. Yeah.
It's amazing. And also I love the fact that when I visited the redwoods, when I lived in California, it's that there's a family of trees, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they support each other. So they'll grow in a circle of 5 or 6. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. They often call that a fairy ring.
Yeah.
And so usually that happens if the original tree dies, whether it was due to logging or a natural cause, and then it's considered like a clone. All the sprouts around that tree grow up and they grow in a nice circle. And what's kind of unique about redwood trees, as opposed to some other trees that grow tall in the forest, like we also have the Douglas fir, the redwood trees' roots actually are very shallow. They don't go really deep like we think of a taproot going down. They spread out, and then they are what support the other trees around. So it's not that the roots go down deep and the soil is supporting them, but it's the other trees around them that support.
That. I love
Isn't that beautiful?
It is beautiful. I think the symbolism of redwoods, not only are they these majestic trees that you're just in awe of, hundreds of feet tall, it's just amazing, but also that there's a connection between each tree and that family. Yeah. And like I said, they're supporting each other. It's beautiful. Definitely we can learn a lot from the redwoods and their longevity.
I was just thinking of that. I mean, the amount of human life cycles some of them have seen, the ancient redwood trees, the ones that live a long time, they can live to be 2,000 years old.
Oh my God.
And and so when you think about just the amount of lifetimes of people that have come and passed and seen that they have seen, right? And been around, and the changes that have happened on the earth in that amount of time,
right.
It's just astounding.
Yeah. And it just reminds us of the importance, of course, of respecting nature. And all of us on the path of Ayurveda and yoga understand our connection to nature and respect nature. But also, again, we're talking about the awareness and really tuning in to nature, taking time out in nature. We're on this journey of health and well-being, but also that should extend to our environment, right? As well. It's not only, we want to start our journey, of course, with healing ourselves, but then that it trickles out and vibrates out into healing our environment around us. And that includes nature. So I think that's an important part of our journey is our connection to nature. As we heard Jen talk about today, we are deeply connected to nature, and having that awareness, spending time in nature, getting to know your local nature as well, because there's so many healing properties in the plants, in the herbs that grow in your specific area. I think it's just fascinating to have that as well as part of your studies and your awareness. And Jen, obviously you spend a lot of time in nature.
Oh, yes, definitely. And that's where, we come back to what we talked about at the very beginning of why it's important to be connected to nature. I mean, we have to really be stewards because we need to take care of nature because first, nature really took care of us. It provided us with all of the things that we need to live. I was mentioning at the very beginning, the air, the water, the food that we need. And if we aren't reciprocating and taking care back, those things that we need are not going to be there for us, right? If we pollute the water, if we don't take care of the land, the soil, and continue to allow it to be nutrient rich to give us the food that we need, we won't be supported and we won't be healthy. I mean, we have these events that happen from time to time where the air outside gets contaminated and they say, stay inside and put on an air filter. And it's like, my goodness, what is happening that we can't even go out into a place that, gave us our original life to begin with. And so that really is a stark warning for us to think about, if we want to be taken care of by nature, we have to take care back. It's really a process of respect,
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's something we need to survive. We need each other. So part of this Ayurvedic and yogic path is understanding that connection and respecting it more, and then helping others understand that as well as we go on this journey.
Definitely. Yeah.
So Jen, as we were talking about this beautiful campus, Mount Madonna Institute, I'm sure people want to know more. So tell us where people can find out more about Mount Madonna Institute, see photos, the gorgeous photos of the campus, and find out more about your programs, please.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, we have a website, mountmadonnainstitute.org. There are some nice, beautiful photos there. And also we have social media pages. We're on Facebook and we're on Instagram. And those two places are actually really nice to find more of those beautiful photos and see what we look like. There's folks who are on campus all the time taking pictures of not only our beautiful scenes in nature, but we have a beautiful Hanuman temple up there. So there's some pictures of that. So you can really get an idea of what our campus looks like by going to our website and checking us out on social media.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jen. This is great to have this discussion, very timely. And I think it's so important to help people prepare for the season ahead so that we remain in balance and prevent any aggravations of the doshas, that we can thrive in the season ahead. So thank you so much for chatting with us today, Jen.
Of course. Thank you. It was great.
I hope you found that podcast episode helpful, and please check out the show notes for all the links mentioned in this episode. If you think this episode will be helpful to family or friends, please share it with them so we can get this wisdom of Ayurveda out into the world. And if you need support on this journey, I have that Daily Habits for Holistic Health program. It's a 28-day online self-paced program, so you can sign up at any time and go through it at your own pace. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do so, and the new episodes will automatically download for you. And if you would like to rate and review the podcast, I would really appreciate that. You can find me on social media under Elements Healing and Wellbeing on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.